At first glance, this picture seemed to look average, normal, a little sweet old lady. However, Betty Numar was anything but. This is the case of the Black Widow grandmother. Viewer discretion is advised. Trigger warning, mention of graphic detail. Betty LaFawn Johnson was born on November 27, 1931. By all accounts, she had a normal childhood and she graduated from high school in 1949. She was married 5 times. However, Betty always managed to become a widow and not a divorcee. Let's get into it. Betty's first husband, Clarence Malone, she married him in 1950 and divorced him only 2 years later. However, Clarence Malone will be found shot dead twice in the back of the head. It was rumored at that time that he and Betty were still messing around, although secretly. Betty's next husband, she married him in 1953. Although he died in 1955 after he was shot dead on a pier. He would then marry her third husband, Richard Sells, in 1956, and they were married up until his death in 1967. Richard had, after an argument the couple had, closed himself in a bedroom in their Florida home and unalived himself via shooting himself in the head. Betty would marry her fourth husband, Harold Gentry, in 1968, and they were married until his death in 1986. Gentry would be found shot multiple times in the couple's North Carolina home. Again, Betty was suspected, but there was no evidence to prove otherwise. Betty would marry a final time in 1991, and her fifth and final husband, he would die under suspicious circumstances, although his death was ruled natural causes due to sepsis. However, after her fifth husband died in 2007, police would start to look closer at Betty Numar. It started when the son of John Numar contacted the widow about visiting his father's grave, and he had determined from the conversation, based on what Betty told him, that Betty had cremated his father immediately after the autopsy and that she had the ashes in her home. This infuriated John Numar's son, and he immediately pointed the finger at Betty Numar. However, police were not idle. Upon looking at Betty Numar's history with men, they determined that all of Betty's husbands died under eerily similar or suspicious circumstances. In May of 2008, Betty Numar was charged with 3 counts of solicitation to murder and 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of her fourth husband. A trial date was never set. He was released on bond in October of 2008. After DNA test results determined that John Numar did not die of arsenic poisoning or anything other than natural causes, they dropped the case against her. Betty Numar would never confess or never, in a court of law, be tried or convicted of any of these crimes. On June 13, 2011, Betty Numar would pass away from cancer in an Alexandria, Louisiana hospital. She died a few weeks before she was scheduled to stand trial to answer for her charges. As of 2013, the cases are not actively being investigated, although police are satisfied in knowing that Betty Numar was the culprit in all 5 deaths of these men. She was also a suspect in the suspected suicide cover-up of her son in 1985, although there was never any evidence to prove Betty Numar either directly or indirectly caused the death of her son.